This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
Good morning, 9 o'clock. I'm Nicky Campbell. This is your call. Should the time limit for abortions be reduced? The present limit is 24 weeks in England, Wales and Scotland. We, of course, have a different situation in Northern Ireland. The Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, supports a 12-week limit because this is when he says life begins. Now, several of his cabinet colleagues support a more modest reduction, as does Dr. Peter Saunders from the Christian Medical Fellowship.
Try telling a mother who feels her baby kick at 18 to 20 weeks that it's not human. And when we see babies born early, when stabbed in the heel with a needle crying, you cannot deny the humanity of the baby.
But Daring Alexic is from the campaign group Abortion Rights, and she disagrees.
There hasn't been any improvement in survival rates before 24 weeks. Chances for babies are getting better after 24 weeks, but before that, survival rates are infinitesimally small. The best way to reduce the abortion rate is providing better access to contraception and good sex and relationships education in schools.
Well, when do you think life begins? Should the time limit for abortions be reduced? Do you agree with the Secretary of State? Call me 0500 909 693. You're with 5 Live from the BBC. So the abortion debate. Let's speak to Professor Wendy Savage. Good morning to you, campaigner on women's rights. Hello.
Good morning.
And also Josephine Quintavalli joins us, who is a member of the Pro-Life Alliance, as they are called. Josephine Quintavalli, what do you think the abortion limit should be?
Well, we don't think there should be any abortion. We believe, which I think most scientists do, otherwise they're rather ignorant of their biology, that life begins at the moment of conception. Anybody who has IVF treatment is very excited when a new embryo is created. They know it's a human life which is going through its natural process of development. So we're not in favour of any upper limit on abortion. We are campaigning always to see the end of abortion, just as others have in the past campaigned to see the end of slavery. But at the moment, the position that Jeremy Hunt's taken is very interesting.
Can I stop you there? Can I stop you there? And I will, of course, let you expand upon that point about Jeremy Hunt. But you said something. You said a number of interesting things, as you always do. But you said you as with the end of slavery, do you equate what you would see as the evil of abortion with the human evil of slavery?
Yes, I think we've dehumanised the human embryo and the developing child in the womb to the same extent that whenever man has wanted to attack and be ruthless against others, you diminish and you try and redefine what you're dealing with.
The moment of conception.
At the moment that people talk all the time about the fetus. Now, the fetus does mean unborn child in Latin, but we well know that it diminishes the emotional impact of the developing child, and we always use the word unborn child. Of course it's not born, but it's an unborn child going through the process of human life, which we all go through.
Right, so that millisecond after the moment of conception, as the gametes have come together, that is a human life, is it? It
is a human life, and I mean, biologically that's indisputable. I think the argument is what value we attribute to it, and at what stage can we enter into a balancing act between the rights of the unborn child and the rights of the mother, and we say that's an unfair and unacceptable balancing act. The child has every right to protection, whether in the womb, in the petri dish, or newborn. A newborn child is as vulnerable as you could possibly get in the human condition.
Professor,
no newborn child could survive without our help.
Professor Wendy Savage, the child in the petri dish. That's quite a phrase, isn't it, Wendy Savage?
I agree with Josephine that life begins at conception, but nature is prodigal, and at least 50% of fertilised ova are lost before the first missed period. And then another 10% of those pregnancies will spontaneously miscarry by 12 weeks. And it's not an unborn child. The English language is extremely rich, and we have words for different things. And we call it an embryo once the various parts of the body have been formed. Before that, we have the fertilized ovum, the blastocyst, and then after the embryo, we start talking about the fetus. And, we have fetal monitoring, electronic fetal monitoring, when the woman is in labor. And I really do think, I mean, I'm delighted to hear Josephine coming out and telling us that they are against all abortion, because we know that this emphasis on the time limits is just a tactic in the battle that they are waging against a woman's right to choose whether or not to continue with her pregnancy. And 80% of the population, when polled, for at least the last 30 years, have said that they agree that the decision on whether to carry on with a pregnancy should be made by the woman in conjunction with her doctor. What the anti-abortion lobby, of which Josephine is one, believe is that women should be compulsorily pregnant, and they want to force their views on the rest of society, which do not hold them. Excuse me.
Don't worry. Let me bring in a call here, a couple of calls, as you've set out your stalls, both of you, very clearly. Let's bring Tony in Warwickshire and Linda in Coventry. Good morning. Thank you for calling us, and we welcome anyone who calls us. And you don't have to use your real names if it's a subject that you feel very upset about and you want to remain anonymous. We'll respect that. But I think, Tony, that is your name. Good morning.
It is, yeah, and I'm probably more passionate about this than anybody else, because my partner gave birth to a 23-week-old plus 1 day baby in May this year.
Well, blimey.
And she survived.
She survived?
Yeah. She's now just coming up to 6 months old. She's just about reached what is classified as normal birth weight. She's just under 7 pounds now. But when she was born, she was 590 grams.
Tiny.
Yeah, the size of your hand.
Mm.
And I think this step of, making abortion from 12 weeks is probably a step too far. We always seem to do things in big leaps. What probably would be more appropriate, based on medical evidence, is to reduce it down to 20 weeks. Life starts from day one. We know that and understand that. But viable life, and that's the key here, viable life, probably is around about 22 weeks plus 2 plus 3 days. And that's when our medical teams now can actually make or help survival rates higher. We obviously have been a party to quite a number of very premature births over the last 6 months, and have seen babies come in at 25 weeks, 26 weeks that have not survived.
What's your little girl called? Sorry, I do beg your pardon, it slipped by me. What's your little girl called?
Nadine.
Nadine, okay. And how is Nadine now?
She's doing really well. She's had some major upheavals over the last 6 months. She was given oxygen for probably the first 10 weeks of her life to obviously, start formulating the lungs. She's had 2 major eye surgeries, because at 23 weeks the eye stopped growing, so she had to have some laser treatment, and because of the laser treatment, the retina was actually starting to detach from the eye, so she had to have 6 hours of eye surgery. But apart from that, and she suffers from reflux as well. Apart from that, she looks like a normal baby. She's not a very good sleeper at the moment. She's obviously struggling with her sleep, but I think that's the same with any young baby.
That's par for the course, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but the reality is, why don't we do this in stages? I understand people who are pro-life. I totally understand and concur with their thoughts that life does begin from day one. As soon as those 2 cells join together and split, that is the formulation of life. But it's viable life. What is a viable life? And I think the reality is 20 weeks, you're not going... until we actually improve our medical care, 20 weeks, you're not going to get a viable baby. And the reality is, as well, is there's going to be so many things wrong with that. You've potentially got cerebral palsy, hearing, eyes, spinal, breathing. There's a whole load of, things that could be potentially wrong with that baby.
Wendy Savage... Wendy Savage, what do you say to Linda? I'll bring you in a minute. Are you there, Linda?
Yes, I am.
Good morning.
Morning.
Wendy Savage, 23 weeks. Nadine, 23 weeks and 1 day, Wendy.
Well, 15% of babies at 23 weeks will survive, according to the Epicure study, which are they've done it twice in 1995 and 2006.
So is there an argument for moving to 20 weeks?
No.
Right.
Most of the women who come after 20 weeks have compelling reasons why they need to terminate their pregnancies. A quarter of them is because there is a congenital abnormality, so that the fetus is damaged in some way, and it's up to the parents to decide, do we want to continue with a pregnancy which will be lifelong care, as your last caller said, with cerebral palsy or other abnormalities.
Well, but that's just... I'm sure you understand the arguments against that. Anyone listening with cerebral palsy right now might be taking some exception to what you're saying.
Right, well,
they are in any way lesser person.
I'm not expressing it very well. I'm talking about really severe handicaps where you have a child who's deaf, blind, cannot walk. That kind of really severe damage may occur. Now, at 22 weeks, it's 1%. There were 3 babies that survived in the 2006 cohort. One of those developed normally at 3 years of age. One of them was moderately handicapped, and one of them was severely handicapped. And to change the law on abortion on the basis of these small numbers without thinking about the needs of the woman who's requesting the abortion, 25% of whom will have an abnormality of the fetus, is quite wrong.
Okay, well, we're going to speak to Linda and Sandra in a second, but Josephine Quintavalli, I'll bring you back just before we have the travel news, but I just want to lay down some facts and figures for our listeners. The 24-week limit applies to England, Wales and Scotland, as we know. Abortion is illegal in Northern Ireland, except in exceptional medical circumstances, such as when the mother's health is at risk. There were nearly 100...
Why don't we do that in the UK?
Sorry?
So why don't we do that in England, Wales?
What, have it make it illegal except in exceptional medical circumstances?
Nicky, can I come in?
In a second,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. That's your view. In a second, Josephine, okay. I just want to do this stat here.
Yeah, okay.
There were nearly 190,000 abortions for women in England and Wales last year, 91% of which were carried out before the 13th week of pregnancy. 91%, according to the Department of Health figures. Josephine, go on.
Well, this is what I think we have to distinguish between very carefully about what we do intentionally and what happens unfortunately and accidentally, and the premature baby who's born early doesn't represent a correct parallel for abortion. 98% of the abortions in the United Kingdom are not performed for disability, but I think the public needs to know too that we have a discriminatory aspect in our abortion law whereby you can, in normal circumstances, abortion's available up to 24 weeks, but up to birth for disability. And I feel, how does that equate with our equality legislation? We did draw attention to this after the Paralympics and said, rightly, we've been triumphing the success of disabled athletes. But we do need to look at this issue. Is our attitude to disability really genuine if we've got a different upper limit for abortion?
Another quick point for you, though. What does this say about our attitude to women's rights? If a woman is raped or is raped by her father and is pregnant and you say to her, you should not have an abortion?
Well, the issue of rape is obviously very, very, a very dramatic issue. I have counselled, I worked for 20 years counselling women in crisis pregnancy, and I did counsel, in particular, one woman who'd been raped, actually, by her employer. And I asked her, she went ahead with the pregnancy with a lot of help from people. And I asked her 3 years later whether I could talk about what had happened to her. And she said, why? And I said, because you've done something very courageous in bringing up this child and loving him. And the issue of how that child had been conceived had disappeared from her memory.
Okay, we're going to speak to Linda and Sandra in just a second. Thank you so much for hanging on. More to come from our guests as well. It's 9:18. Here's Michelle. We've got Rachel in Liverpool, Sandra in Paisley, and Linda in Coventry. Thank you all so much for calling us. Rachel, good morning. What's your story?
Good morning, Nicky. I was a student at the time, and found myself to be pregnant, and went through the very difficult decision, and it was a very difficult and traumatic decision about what I was going to do, and I thought about it for a very long time, and I came to the conclusion at the time that the best thing for me to do was to have a termination or abortion. And it's a decision that I have thought about over the years, but also I have decided that I made the right decision at the time. The the right decision. I have 2 beautiful children who I adore. I have a career, a husband, and I do feel for everyone making a decision. It's not an easy decision for any woman to make, whether they be 16, whether they be 20, whether they be 30, to go through that decision. And it sometimes takes a long time to actually reach the decision that you're going to make. So I'm very strongly against reducing the time limit on terminations.
Even by maybe 4 weeks to 20 weeks, or?
I think sometimes by the time you realise that you're pregnant, can take weeks, and then think about the decision and maybe talk about it with people if you can talk about it, because very often women can't talk to anybody about this decision. It sometimes takes up to that time length, and I certainly wouldn't want to restrict any woman on making that decision.
We're into that. I mean, you say if you had gone on and had that particular child, you would not have the 2 beautiful children that you have now. Then we're into that sort of moral labyrinth, aren't we, about a philosophical hall of mirrors, aren't we? And what would have happened?
It's a very personal decision for any woman to make, and I understand that people have different viewpoints, and some people feel very moralistic about it.
So, I'm going to bring Sandra in. Please stay there. I feel you probably have something else to say. Listen to Sandra first. Sandra, what would you like to say this morning?
Rachel, and I can't imagine what happened to me. I had a son, and a son was a rare condition called Townes-Brocks syndrome. So I decided to stop my family. I thought I'd get sterilised, but the doctor said, to take the Mirena coil, which I did, and it's 99.9% effective. But I was the one in 1,000 women who got pregnant with it. And I only found out at 26 weeks, and I wasn't a 16-year-old. I was a mature woman who I thought would know, but I was being pregnant, And because the impact of having another child on our family has been so devastating. My youngest son, who I loved a bit, Callum, who was born because of that, he has autism as well. So it's just the way it affected our family dynamics. But I love him to bits, but I wouldn't have chosen to have him. You know what I mean? He's been part of my life now, and I love him, and that's the reason, because conception is not 100% effective, unfortunately, No,
it's not. It's not at all.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, especially when you're younger, you assume that it is going to be that. And at the time, when I personally found out I was pregnant, it was a huge stress to go through. And in fact, with one of my children that I have, I went through the whole situation of maybe that child being ill when she had been born. And I think as a female, you go through lots of stresses, being either going through pregnancy or not going through it. It is a very traumatic time at every level. There can be.
I know.
It's like a life-changing process.
Yes.
And I certainly wouldn't. I would never. There were some people who feel very, very strongly that the whole concept of life begins at conception. Life begins when the small fingernails. Life begins. But for me personally, I certainly have never looked back at the decision I made. I have thought about it. But it certainly hasn't hung over me. I'm very clear that it is the right decision at that moment in time to make.
Let me bring Linda in as well. Linda, the decision has hung over you, hasn't it?
It has. I was made to have an abortion when I was 18. Then I met my husband, and I lost a little boy in 1975. He was 2 days old. I blame myself.
That's awful. It's a dreadful thing to go through.
And it just shows that women, when women make that decision to do that, it's not an easy one. It's not an easy option.
Let's hear more. Let's hear from Linda. Let's give Linda a little bit of space to tell the rest of her story.
We had him buried at Wimble Road, and then I had a daughter and a son, and then I had another son, and I lost him 2 days old as well. We attended the grave for about 8 years, but after I lost my last son, I couldn't cope with it. I just pretended it just didn't happen to me. I blanked everything all out. I kept having breakdowns. I tried to commit suicide, and I just couldn't cope with it. I just couldn't cope with anything. Do
you think it comes down to the fact that your parents made you have the abortion? Do you think the problems with hindsight come down to that? What you might see as that fateful decision?
I think I just don't know. I just blame myself for everything. I am seeing a counsellor for my depression, and she's been very good. And I've told her everything, and I made up my mind to go back to Windmill Road to see my son again. But when we got there in March this year, I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find anything we put with his name on. I couldn't find his grave at all. So I went to the caretaker's wife, and I asked her if she can tell me where my son was. And she said, well, I would have to get in touch with Canley Crematorium, which I did do. I spoke to a lady, and she said she was very busy, but she would meet me on a certain day. But she didn't turn up. A gravedigger turned up, and he showed me a little bit of grass. Nothing on it. And I said to him, well, that can't be. That just can't be. I said, we bought a plot of land in 1975 with a 99-year lease, and you're telling me it's that little bit there. So he said, well, if I wasn't satisfied, he took my name, he took my address and my telephone number, and a lady got in touch with me, and she was the bereavement lady, and I met her in Moor Road, and she went and showed me another plot, and I said, that is not the first plot I was shown in the first place, but she disagreed with me, and she said it was, and I said, but all them things on that plot is not mine. Nothing on there is mine.
Well, do you know what this? Linda, it was such a powerful story. Do you know what this shows? And let me ask, actually, before we move on, Wendy Savage, the campaigner for women's rights and for abortion rights, Professor Savage, what we've heard just shows how this is such a sensitive issue, such a powerful issue, and it just affects different people in different ways, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, and that's why I think the law needs to be changed so that abortion is no longer a criminal process. If it doesn't conform with the law, it is a medical, personal process. And I was very moved by the story of Sandra and of Linda. And I think that the bureaucracy, it's shocking that this should happen to Linda. But also, one of the things about a woman's right to choose is that she must be able to choose, and the doctor must pick up when she is being forced into doing something which isn't her choice. And therefore, particularly with young women, you need to have the time to explore whether they really are making a free choice or whether they're being pressured into it by their parents or their partner. And if the woman has made a free choice, she's very unlikely to regret it.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks all so far. Very greatly appreciated people getting in touch with the programme. 0500 909 693. We will continue to discuss abortion in the next half hour of your call. And the question we ask, should the time limit for abortions be reduced? Present limit 24 weeks in England, Wales and Scotland. It's illegal in Northern Ireland, save for exceptional medical circumstances. We are going to speak to an MP about this in a second. It is Mark Pritchard, Conservative MP, Vice Chairman of the Parliamentary Pro-Life Group. Good morning.
Morning, Nicky.
Let's have on as well. We've still, let me just remind you as well, we've still got Wendy Savage, Professor Wendy Savage, campaigner for women's rights, on the line, and we're going to speak to Wendy in London and Gabrielle in Essex. Gabrielle, good morning to you. Hello, Wendy, are you there as well?
Yes, I'm here.
Excellent. Gabrielle, you go first.
Well, I just think why we have this punitive approach to women's bodies, and I think if anybody could see the results of forcing women to carry on and give birth when they give birth to very premature babies, to see the results, these pro-life people would have you believe that everything's rosy in the garden. And as a midwife, I have seen the results. As a health visitor with 30 years' experience, I have unfortunately seen these children grow and not prosper, not thrive. And these families, everything gets sacrificed on the altar of these children's needs. And it just is tragic. And a lot of these parents will say to you, if I had known how it was going to be, I would not have done this. I would not have put my child through this. I would not have done this.
Mark Pritchard, how do you react to that?
Well, of course, the Secretary of State for Health was suggesting bringing the current term limit down from 24 weeks to 12 weeks. We've also had the Culture Secretary and the Home Secretary suggest their personal opinion, of course, that...
We've been through all this.
Yeah, exactly.
React to what you just heard.
Well, we're not, nobody's saying abortion should be stopped. Nobody's saying that early term abortion should be stopped. All that many members of Parliament, reflecting, by the way, 2/3 of public opinion, are saying is that the law is currently lagging behind breakthroughs in neonatal care, scientific breakthroughs, and the survivability of children 22 to 24 weeks is now at around 71%, whereas 10 years ago it was in around 36%. So science has broken through, the law's lagging behind, and I think it's time to update the law. We need a debate about it. What's wrong in a democracy about having an up-to-date debate about abortion?
Indeed.
Nicky, can I just come back there?
By all means.
Could he produce his research to back that up? Because I'm afraid the research will show that, unfortunately, and I'm sure Wendy will be able to back me up on this, unfortunately, and the research is there to back me up, 50% of those neonates under 25, 26 weeks will die. Of the 50% who survive, so take 100% of the babies who go into special care who are under 26 weeks. 50% of those are not going to make it, okay? So the 50% who get left, of those, 50% are going to have a very high degree of morbidity.
I'm going to bring Wendy in London in as well, who's called us. Hello, Wendy. Thank you for calling us this morning.
Hello, yes. Well, first of all, I want to say that I'm not talking about survival rates and I'm not talking about disabled babies. I'm talking about normal babies who've got irresponsible parents. My daughter-in-law had great trouble getting pregnant. We've been watching this pregnancy week by week as the babies develop. When she has a scan, they say the babies are fine, they're moving around, they're very lively, they're very little, but they're alive. They're babies. Don't call them fetuses. Don't make out that they're not human. They're little human beings desperate to come into this world. How can anybody want to get rid of these children? It's awful. It's awful.
Dr. Evan,
the only reason that you might want to have an abortion is for the child's sake. For the child's sake, because the child will have a horrible life, because the child will be disabled, but not for a normal child. And for that, a normal child, when a child's normal.
Nicky,
when a child's normal from 14 weeks. Well,
okay, I'm going to bring in Dr. Evan Harris on that point to speak to you, Wendy in London, and Mark Pritchard. You're shaking your head.
I am shaking your head. Oh, you've got a webcam in here. No, because Dr. Evan Harris and I have never agreed on this.
But you said it was good to have a debate.
Well, it is good to have a debate, and I disagree with him on the points.
Don't shake your head. Embrace the fact that there's vive la différence.
I'm shaking my head to disagree. I think even in a democracy you can shake your head.
Yes, you can.
Thank you, Nicky. Thank you. You've been around long enough to know that. It's not as bad as Central Weekend Live or whatever it was.
That's going back a bit. Evan Harris, respond to what Wendy in London
said. I just wanted to agree with Mark Pritchard that it's always good to have a debate about these things. And I'm sorry if that's an agreement. I know Mark wanted to disagree before I'd even spoken. He knows that I think that it's important that these things are debated. But they must be debated because it's a matter of the welfare, the health and welfare of hundreds of thousands of women.
All right, we're having that debate, and you heard from Wendy in London. You heard. Wait. You heard.
Excuse me. I'm not talking about people who can't look after their children. I'm talking about normal people. If you don't want to have a baby, let someone else have the opportunity to have it. There's plenty of people out there who are desperate to have children, can't have them of their own. If you don't want to have it, let somebody adopt it at birth.
Make adoption an option.
So if I can just finish my first sentence.
An option, thank you. Don't go around killing little babies.
Of course, adoption.
Dr. Evan Harris.
I do need to be able to make my point. Adoption is, of course, an option, but what you can't do in a free society is force women to go through 9 months of gestation and force them to give birth against their will in order to take the baby away from them.
Wendy, let Evan Harris finish his point.
Civilized countries don't do that, okay? Now, obviously, we want to minimise
I don't think it's very civilized to kill a baby, sorry.
Hang on. If I can just finish my point. We need to make sure that we reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies, and we do that by having better sex education.
Wendy,
have contraception.
Wendy, you've made your points very powerfully. Let Evan Harris just finish a sentence or two.
We reduce the number of abortions by reducing the number of unwanted pregnancies, in turn by improving sex education, like they have in other parts of Europe, where more information is given, not less, and improved access to contraception. And the very same people who oppose abortion, which they're entitled to do on religious grounds, also argue for more ignorance when it comes to sex education and less access to contraception.
I think young women should be educated. I think they should have access to
I
contraception.
absolutely agree with you.
Nicky, am I allowed to make a point?
I absolutely agree with you, but can I just make the point to Mark that it's absolutely essential, and to Jeremy Hunt, if we're going to have this debate, people don't make up scientific information. You're entitled to your opinion, Mark, and the Secretary of State for Health, but you're not entitled to your own facts.
Okay, we are going to address the scientific issues, and I'd like to do that with both of you because it's very important. We're going to bring that on. We're going to bring that through, Wendy. Right now, though, we have to go back to Aberystwyth.
This is 5 Live Breakfast. Your call.
All right, we've got Dr. Evan Harris, Vice Chairman of the Liberal Democrat Federal Policy Committee, who, of course, has a scientific background. And I'm not sure if you do or you don't, Mark Pritchard MP, but
no, I don't.
Sorry?
No, I don't.
No, I don't. What's your understanding of the science?
Well, let's look at the scientific facts. The fact is that there have been several cases around the world and a few in the UK of babies being born at 21 weeks plus and still surviving. So it's clear that there has been breakthroughs in improving neonatal care. And it is clear, because the evidence is there, these children are out there living, and some years ago, that would not have been the case, and that is why I don't think it's particularly controversial to say that we should have a law that reflects scientific know-how today. And if people don't believe what I say, they can go on the internet and just Google baby survives at 21 weeks, and they'll see many cases around the world and cases here in the UK. And therefore, the law is lagging behind science. We need it to catch up.
Evan Harris.
Well, that's wrong on almost every level. Firstly, if you're going to use what's called viability, fetal viability, that is the ability of the fetus to live without major disability independently of the mother, so it has some rights to be considered, and many MPs, I accept, probably the majority, a significant number base their view on that rather than simply supporting 24 weeks for its own sake. What's absolutely clear is that there's no justification for 12 weeks, okay? So the debate would be, has it dropped to 22 weeks, say, okay? Right. So for Jeremy Hunt to say scientific evidence moves him to think that 12 weeks is right, shows that he has... It's just away with the fairies.
Are you then suggesting, Evan, are you then suggesting, and if you are, I think it's a helpful recognition of somebody with a scientific background like yourself, that science has moved on? Are you then are you then inferring that even you would accept that it is now time to see the term limit reduced to 22?
No, I'm not 22. Inferring. You don't have to infer or imply anything.
Okay.
I'm going to tell you what I think if I finish.
Sure.
So firstly, the debate over viability is irrelevant to 12 weeks. That's completely, and he admitted, a religious view, and he shouldn't have said based on the scientific evidence. And it worries me that the Secretary of State for Health doesn't know the difference between religion and science. The second thing is, if we're looking at viability, there is a massive study being conducted called Epicure 2 with returns from every neonatal unit in the country, and that demonstrated very clearly, as set out in a Common Science and Technology Select Committee report, that there was no change in viability.
But Evan, we only have a brief amount of time today. You and I have both read those reports.
There are no cases of 21 week survivors either.
I'm sorry.
With you.
Well, it's not a matter of disagreeing with me.
Anecdote. No child has been born at 21 weeks.
I think it was 21 weeks, 6 days or something like that, if you want to argue about it.
Neil's in Merseyside, everyone. Listen, Neil's in Merseyside. Neil, okay, we know you're saying it's wrong, he's saying it's right. We can all check it out later on and find out who's right. We're not getting anywhere. Neil in Merseyside. Good morning, Neil.
Good morning, Nicky. Good morning, Evan and all the others. I'm a lawyer and I'm involved in representing a number of groups that are on the pro-life side, and I'm getting concerned by the fact that there seems to be an attempt by a certain number of organisations to try and prevent the debate, and that's why I'm really delighted we're having a proper debate, the programme this morning. I've been contacted by a number of students in various student unions, and I'm trying to collate the cases at the moment, who were refused the right to have a pro-life stalls in their Freshers' Week on the basis that the student union's policy was pro-abortion or pro-choice, as it would be put. I've represented a woman who was employed by the NHS. She gave a colleague, not a patient, a colleague, a booklet where women talked about their experiences of abortion and the effect it had on them. She ultimately ended up being found guilty of gross misconduct and sacked from the NHS. And I'm representing nurses who are now coming under increasing pressure within the NHS to participate in abortions. So my real concern that I'm raising this morning is that there is a real debate on abortion that I think has come out very clearly from this. But certainly within the NHS, and now it would appear within universities, there is an attempt to try and close down that debate.
Absolutely, and in fact it's been very, very difficult to extract some figures from the Department of Health, and people will know that it's taken some pretty serious law cases to get those
I think it's appropriate that we go to somebody in a minute, Evan Harris, but I think it's appropriate that we go to Paula Franklin from Murray Stopes on this. Paula Franklin, good morning.
Good morning.
Your reaction to the allegation that debate is being sort of closed down, and those who do have a position which similar to Mark's and perhaps even stronger, they're being marginalised. Paula Franklin.
Well, I wasn't really aware that was happening. I certainly would welcome the debate. I suppose my preference would be that we have a debate that is informed. And that has a... Well,
everyone says that, don't they? Whatever they think.
Well, yeah.
They have different information.
A lot of discussion about science, which is obviously important, and the evidence, but I'm not hearing much so far about women, about the women who are involved in the very difficult circumstances that they find themselves in, the very difficult choices that they have to make. This is always a difficult choice for a woman, regardless of the stage of the pregnancy that she's carrying, and I think that's something that ought to be included in the debate as we have it.
Mm. Yeah, but we do need a legal framework, and the point that the Secretary of State, I think, was making is that the law does need to catch up with science. I think there also needs to be a wider debate about the number of abortions, nearly 200,000 in England and Wales last year, and the number of women having repeat abortions, some having up to 7 abortions.
If they were to override the parliamentary system that we have in this country, and the system of making laws, and all of a sudden a man was to come along with a magic wand and give it to you, Mark Pritchard, and say, right, you are now going to ordain and you are going to set the abortion limit in the ideal world, and we will carry on with that. Where would you set it, Mark Pritchard?
Well, to quote Aristotle, politics is the art of the possible.
So no. We're not talking about the possible. We're talking about what you in your heart would like.
Well, in an ideal world, you'd have the nuclear family all over the world, no divorce, no abortions, no child's out of wedlock, no children put into orphanages.
No
but
gay couples.
Excuse me?
no gay couples and civil partnerships
excuse me, well, don't make a great assumption, Evan. Forgive me. I've said what I've said in answer to the question. The fact is, we don't live in an ideal world. So therefore, we have to deal with what we have. And the
12 weeks? Would you welcome 12 weeks?
No, I want to campaign for 20 weeks because I think...
Is this a wedge to bring it down even further, though?
Well, I think that it would be very healthy in each parliament to have a debate on this issue to make sure that we are up to date with science. Yeah, let's.
I agree. I agree with that. Can I just say, I agree with that.
It's a rational position.
But you mustn't misrepresent the science, and that's why the Royal College of Obstetrics and Gynecology and the British Medical Association, who are not pro-abortion, okay, they're pro the health of people and making sure the science is not misrepresented, agreed with the Common Select Committee that on the latest data the viability has not diminished. But I want to talk about this free speech issue.
Well, what about those babies who are living at 21 weeks, Evan?
Yeah. They are not.
So there are no. So
that's not the measure of viability.
So Nikki, I hope you'll invite Dr. Evan Harris to come back on and apologise to your listeners.
Published data. It's very important that we don't debate science on the basis of anecdote. You look at the published data.
I've read all the reports you've read in Parliament, Evan. I've read all the scientific reports.
What's your point about? I tell you what I'm going to do. I am going to bring in Brian and Chippen. And Brian, good morning. Make a quick point if you could. I know it's not an easy thing to say in a debate like this, but we're edging towards the end. Brian, good morning.
Good morning. Just very briefly, my wife and I, we've got 2 children, and our youngest, my wife had a miscarriage at 11 weeks. She fell pregnant again, and we decided we'd go for an early scan. We had the scan, and we were told that our child wasn't developing properly, that there was an abnormally large nuchal gland, that our child had an exomphalus, the skull wasn't developing properly, and all sorts of manners of problems. We were told that there was a distinct possibility of Patau syndrome, Downs and Edwards, and if you know anything about those conditions, they're not good.
So how did he or she, the little baby, turn out?
Well, perfect. She carried it to term, and there was absolutely nothing wrong with our child. And what's really disturbing for me is the health professional at the time told us after the 20-week scan, we went for the amniocentesis tests and all the rest of it. The health professional, the consultant, said, we know very little about fetal development, which is really concerning.
No, what the doctor meant was that these scans are not absolutely predictive, and they can only give you their best judgment and the likelihood of serious deformity. It's very good news that sometimes what you think might lead to a problem does not, but without going into the womb, it's very hard to judge.
Well, listen, thank you.
That's what the doctor was saying.
Thank you so much, Evan Harris, for your contributions. Thank you very much for that call, Brian. Very thoughtful call. Mark Pritchard, thank you for coming on this morning, and for those who called us as well. Let me just tell you about Oktoberfest. We're going to be in Sheffield, and if you'd like to come and watch Your Call, we're coming live from the Crucible, the famous Crucible Theatre, next Thursday. This Thursday, talking about the North-South divide.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
Good morning, 9 o'clock. I'm Nicky Campbell. This is Your Call. Should the time limit for abortions be reduced? The present limit is 24 weeks in England, Wales and Scotland. We, of course, have a different situation in Northern Ireland. The Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, supports a 12-week limit because this is when he says life begins. Now, several of his cabinet colleagues support a more modest reduction, as does Dr. Peter Saunders from the Christian Medical Fellowship.
Try telling a mother who feels her baby kick at 18 to 20 weeks that it's not human. And when we see babies born early, when stabbed in the heel with a needle crying, you cannot deny the humanity of the baby.
But Daring Alexic is from the campaign group Abortion Rights, and she disagrees.
There hasn't been any improvement in survival rates before 24 weeks. Chances for babies are getting better after 24 weeks.
And be ruthless against others. You diminish and you try and redefine what you're dealing with.
The moment of conception.
At the moment that people talk all the time about the fetus. Now, the fetus does mean unborn child in Latin, but we well know that it diminishes the emotional impact of the developing child, and we always use the word unborn child. Of course it's not born, but it's an unborn child going through the process of human life, which we all go through.
Right. So that millisecond after the moment of conception, as the gametes have come together, that is a human life, is it?
It is a human life, and I mean, biologically that's indisputable. I think the argument is what value we attribute to it, and at what stage can we, enter into a balancing act between the rights of the unborn child and the rights of the mother, and we say that's an unfair and unacceptable balancing act. The child has every right to protection, whether in the womb,
But before that, survival rates are infinitesimally small. The best way to reduce the abortion rate is providing better access to contraception and good sex and relationships education in schools.
Well, when do you think life begins? Should the time limit for abortions be reduced? Do you agree with the Secretary of State? Call me 0500 909 693. You're with 5 Live from the BBC. So the abortion debate. Let's speak to Professor Wendy Savage. Good morning to you, campaigner on women's rights. Hello.
Good morning.
And also Josephine Quintavalli joins us, who is a member of the Pro-Life Alliance, as they are called. Josephine Quintavalli, what do you think the abortion limit should be?
Well, we don't think there should be any abortion. We believe, which I think most scientists do, otherwise they're rather ignorant of their biology, that life begins at the moment of petri dish or newborn. A newborn child is as vulnerable as you could possibly get in the human condition.
Professor,
no newborn child could survive without our help.
Professor Wendy Savage, the child in the petri dish. That's quite a phrase, isn't it, Wendy Savage?
Look, I agree with Josephine that life begins at conception, but nature is prodigal, and at least 50% of fertilized ova are lost before the first missed period. And then another 10% of those pregnancies will spontaneously miscarry by 12 weeks. And it's not an unborn child. The English language is extremely rich, and we have words for different things. And we call it an embryo once the various parts of the body have been formed. Before that, we have
conception. Anybody who has IVF treatment is very excited when a new embryo is created. They know it's a human life which is going through its natural process of development. So we're not in favour of any upper limit on abortion. We are campaigning always to see the end of abortion, just as others have in the past campaigned to see the end of slavery. But at the moment, the position that Jeremy Hunt's taken is very interesting.
Can I stop you there? Can I stop you there? And I will, of course, let you expand upon that point about Jeremy Hunt. But you said something. You said a number of interesting things, as you always do. But you said you as with the end of slavery, do you equate what you would see as the evil of abortion with the human evil of slavery?
Yes, I think we've dehumanised the human embryo and the developing child in the womb to the same extent that whenever man has wanted to attack and